Hello everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. This is Narayan Rao Kovur. In this video, I am going to explain law of supply or theory of supply. Law of supply means ceteris paribus, the quantity of a good produced and offered for sale will increase as the price of the good rises and decreases as the price falls. That means ceteris paribus means other things remains constant except price. Other things remains constant or prices of related commodities, prices of factors of production, state of technology, so government conditions or government policies, etc. etc. except price. If the price of the commodity rises, quantity supply of the same commodity also rises and vice versa. If the price of the commodity falls, quantity supply of the same commodity falls. There is a positive or direct relationship between price and quantity supplied. Next, higher prices leads to more profits, leads to greater incentive to produce the good and offer it for sale and vice versa. That means, so lower price, less profits leads to less incentive to produce the good and offer for its sale and vice versa. That means higher prices, more profits, more supply. So lower price, lower profits, and lower supply. This is called law of supply. Next, ceteris paribus. Other things remains constant. If price rises, quantity supply also rises. This is called expansion. This is called upward movement on the same supply curve. On the other side, if price falls, quantity supply also falls. This is called contraction or so downward movement on the same supply curve. Downward movement on the same supply curve. This is the law of supply or theory of supply. Next, law of supply, supply schedule. Law of supply, supply schedule. So supply schedule is a tabular presentation of law of supply. Supply schedule is a tabular presentation of law of supply. Supply schedule shows that different quantities of a commodity that producers are willing and able to produce and offer to the market at various prices during a given period of time is called supply schedule. Once again, supply schedule shows that different quantities of a commodity that producers are willing and able to offer to the market at various prices during a given period of time is called supply schedule. Next, so individual supply schedule is two types. One is individual supply schedule, another one is market supply schedule. What is individual supply schedule? Individual supply schedule shows that different quantities of a commodity that producers are willing and able to offer to the market at various prices during a given period of time by the single seller or single firm. By the single seller or single firm. This is called individual supply schedule. Individual supply schedule, right? So in the individual supply schedule, so if we observe price 1, quantity supply is 5 kgs. Price increases to 2 rupees, quantity supply also increases 35 kgs. Price increase to 3, quantity supply is 45. Price 4, quantity supply is 55 and so on. Price is 5, quantity supply is 65. So this schedule shows that price increases, quantity supply also increases. Price decreases, quantity supply also decreases. There is a positive or direct relationship between price and quantity supply. So individual supply schedule. Individual supply schedule by the single seller or single firm. That means individual supply schedule shows that different quantities of a commodity that producers are willing and able to offer to the market at various prices during a given period of time by the single seller or single firm. This is called individual supply schedule. Here we have to remember 2 points. One is highest quantity which a seller is willing to supply at each price. If we observe, so if the price is 2, quantity is 35 kgs. So at each price, 1 rupee, quantity supply is 5 kgs. At price 2, quantity supply is 35 kgs. That means highest quantity which a seller is willing to supply at each price. Next, second one is minimum price at which a seller offers at various quantities for sale. For example, 35 units supply చేయాలంటే less than 2 ప్రైస్ గానుంటే సప్లై చేయలేడు. 35 యూనిట్స్ సప్లై చేయాలంటే అక్కడ ప్రైస్ 2 ఉంటే సప్లై చేస్తాడు. లెస్ దాన్ 2 ఉంటే సప్లై చేయలేడు. దట్ ఈస్ ద పాయింట్. మినిమం ప్రైస్ at which a seller offers at various quantities for sale. Next, supply curve. It is a graphical presentation of supply schedule. సప్లై షెడ్యూల్లో ఉన్న ఇన్ఫర్మేషన్ని ఒక గ్రాఫ్ పేపర్ మీద కానీ డ్రా చేస్తే సప్లై కర్వ్ వస్తుంది. దట్ మీన్స్ ఇట్ ఈస్ ఏ గ్రాఫికల్ ప్రజెంటేషన్ ఆఫ్ సప్లై షెడ్యూల్. నెక్స్ట్, సప్లై కర్వ్ స్లోప్స్ upwards from left to right. If we observe this diagram, so draw L shape, mark YOX, price is measured on y-axis, quantity supply is measured on x-axis. So if the price increases, quantity supply also increases. The price increases, quantity supply also increases. The price decreases, quantity supply also decreases. Therefore, there is a positive or direct relationship in the case of price and quantity supply. Supply curve slopes upwards from left to right. That is called individual supply curve. This is called individual supply schedule. So now let us second one, market supply schedule. Market supply schedule shows that different quantities of a commodity that producers are willing and able to offer to the market at various prices during a given period of time by more number of sellers, by more number of firms. That is called market supply schedule. How to obtain market supply schedule means horizontal summation or lateral summation of individual supply schedule, we obtain market supply schedule. Horizontal summation of individual supply schedule, we obtain market supply schedule, or lateral summation of individual supply schedule, we obtain market supply schedule. So individual supply schedule ni అడ్డంగా గాని కూడినట్లయితే మార్కెట్ సప్లై షెడ్యూల్ వస్తుంది. నెక్స్ట్, సో బై మోర్ నంబర్ ఆఫ్ సెల్లర్స్, బై మోర్ నంబర్ ఆఫ్ ఫర్మ్స్. నెక్స్ట్, so market supply curve also slopes upwards from left to right. Individual supply curve slopes upwards from left to right. So horizontal summation or lateral summation of individual supply schedule, then we obtain market supply schedule. Therefore market supply curve also slopes upwards from left to right. Next, this is called market supply schedule and market supply curve. What is the shape of the market supply curve? Market supply curve slopes so upwards from left to right. That means there is a positive relationship between price and quantity supply. This is called law of supply. Next, but in certain situations the law of supply is not valid. The law of supply does not work. The law of supply is failed. Those are called exceptions to the law of supply, limitations to the law of supply. So one is supply of labor. In the case of supply of labor, if the wage rate increases, supply of labor also increases in the initial stages. In the initial stages, wage rate increases, supply of labor also increases. Beyond certain level of income, if wage rate increases, supply of labor decreases because of labor prefer to take leisure, are affluent, or rich, are not willing to work, or sound. That is why if wage rate increases, supply of labor decreases. So if we observe this diagram, so up to in the initial stages, there is a positive slope between wage rate and supply of labor. Beyond certain level of income, there is an inverse relationship between wage rate and supply of labor. So in the case of supply of labor, the supply curve is backward bending supply curve. This is called backward bending supply curve. So if the wage rate increases, what happens? Supply of labor also increases. But what happens in the case if the wage rate increases, supply of labor decreases. So the law of supply is not valid in the case of supply of labor. The shape of the supply curve is backward bending supply curve. Next, second one is rare commodities. Rare commodities. So Kohinoor diamond, Mona Lisa paintings, the sword of Chhatrapati Shivaji, etc., etc. These are called rare commodities. If price increases, quantity supply also increases generally. What happens here? If we pay higher price, those commodities are not available in the market. Supply not increased. Supply does not increase. So rare commodities, if we pay higher price, the supply of those commodities does not increase. The law of supply is failed in the case of rare commodities. Third one is supply of land. So if the price of the land increases, generally the supply of land also increases. But what of the geographical area of our country? That is constant, that is fixed, that is not increased. See, the supply of land, if we pay high rent, more rent, supply of land does not increase. Supply of land is fixed. Supply of land is constant from the point of view of ఎకానమీ పాయింట్ ఆఫ్ వ్యూలో సప్లై ఆఫ్ ల్యాండ్ కాన్స్టెంట్గా ఉంటుంది, సప్లై ఆఫ్ ల్యాండ్ ఫిక్స్డ్గా ఉంటుంది. సో మనం ఎక్కువ రెంట్ పే చేసినా సప్లై ఆఫ్ ల్యాండ్ ఇంక్రీజ్ కాదు. సో ఇన్ దిస్ త్రీ కేసెస్ ద లా ఆఫ్ సప్లై ఈస్ నాట్ వ్యాలిడ్. ద లా ఆఫ్ సప్లై ఫెయిల్స్ టు వర్క్. ద లా ఆఫ్ సప్లై డస్ నాట్ అప్లై. This is something the information regarding theory of supply, supply schedule, supply curve, market supply schedule, market supply curve, and exceptions to the law of supply. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and comment.